With the economy suffering from its most significant decline since the Great Depression because of COVID-19, leading academics and opinion leaders have advocated that the Canadian government build an economic recovery based on a green transition by stimulating renewable energy production. However, even as these voices grow more powerful and the latest science around climate change creates added urgency, it is evident that our federal and provincial governments continue to subsidize fossil fuel production at unparalleled rates. This is the finding of the International Energy Agency, or IEA, which issued a recent report revealing that Canada subsidizes its oil and gas industry at a per capita rate that is 10 times the G20 average. Worse still, government supports by the sector will grow by $12 billion this year alone, with the report noting that only France, which created a massive bailout for Air France earlier this year, has spent more on a per capita basis. This support for a sector directly contributing to the most significant ecological disaster of our times works out to $320 of new supports per Canadian. In the chart, you can see at the top a small portion of the bar graph is colored green. This represents our national and subnational governments in Canada and what they have pledged to green energy production. This graph acutely represents the massive difference between what a supposed climate leader like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau tries to rhetorically claim versus the support he and the provinces have actually offered that continue to entrench the energy production from the last century. Keep in mind these figures only take into account the direct financial support offered to the industry since the beginning of the pandemic. Other forms of indirect or previous supports provided aren't accounted for in the report. Now, this report was generated focusing on the three major pillars of the fossil fuel industry: transportation for highways and roads, aviation, and the fossil fuel production at large. While most countries in the report have structured their support disproportionately to the aviation sector, Canadian governments have more acutely directed their funds directly to the oil and gas industry. Even the United States has pledged more of its bailout dollars to the airline industry. However, it has also offered support to the fossil fuel industry by rolling back environmental regulations and attacking the Environmental Protection Agency. But even when comparing policies enacted to support fossil fuel production through policy during the pandemic, Canada is still leading the way. This policy support isn't surprising, considering the government recently reached a deal with the Alberta government to relax monitoring and regulations of tar sands projects. The fact that we dwarf the next two top countries, Brazil and the United States, should be deeply concerning, however, as leaders of both countries, Donald Trump and Jair Bolsonaro, are notorious climate deniers. This is at the same time Justin Trudeau prances around the world stage and tries to paint himself as the poster boy for climate change leadership, while policies his government advance undermine that claimed mission. Taking away the subnational government support and focusing just on dollars committed by the federal government doesn't reveal the entire picture, but does show us that the federal government's contribution to both sectors, fossil fuel and renewables, is more equitably distributed. Nevertheless, the breakdown still awards a slight advantage to the fossil fuel industry. Moreover, instead of the government enforcing the polluter pay models of production, Trudeau also bailed out oil and gas producers by providing support to clean up their orphan wells, which forces production externalities onto taxpayers instead of the corporations who derive the profits. And to be honest, if in 2020 we subsidize fossil fuel producers to the tune of billions of dollars a year after they've had their sector entrenched for over a century, even a fully equal investment in renewables will still in the end favor the powerful moneyed interest of the fossil fuel sector and its pre-established dominance. However, no government in Canada has played more of a role in perpetuating the dinosaur of the oil and gas industry than the Alberta government, which has a provincial per capita spending that contributes $1,370 per Albertan to the industry. Additionally, Alberta and Ontario combined would have a direct subsidy to the fossil fuel industry that would almost top the G20 list without the rest of the country taken into consideration. Even my home province of British Columbia, that currently has the most aggressive provincial government in the country, subsidized the oil and gas sector to the tune of $663 million in 2018, or about $130 per British Columbian. At the same time, the NDP has developed a new tax incentives and giveaways to promote an LNG industry that will build infrastructure meant to entrench production for decades to come. Now, many conservative talking heads will continually return to the argument that Canada's greenhouse gas emissions are less than 2% of global emissions, therefore we don't have as great of a footprint and thus require us to do less to combat this global struggle. But as the IAE report makes clear, Canada is second only to Saudi Arabia when it comes to fossil fuel consumption per capita, ranking in the top 1% of global consumption on that basis. Also, since our confederation, we have never fallen out of the top 10 per capita consumers of fossil fuels in the world. In March, 265 notable academics sent a letter to the Prime Minister demanding a recovery plan that prioritizes this and stimulates renewable energy and a just transition for workers affected by the transformation of our economy. As it currently stands, we don't have a credible plan to be carbon neutral by 2050, supposedly a plank of our government's decarbonization aims. A just transition and recovery based on renewable energy and stimulating clean growth is not an ephemeral desire. It is the only way to avoid the existential threat that unmitigated climate change poses to our civilization. Is not the time to be complacent. The last time emissions dropped so considerably, and we had the opportunity for a transformational investment that could stimulate renewable energy, was in 2008 during the downturn of the economy. However, the oil and gas behemoth rebounded and grew at an even greater rapid pace after the collapse and during the recovery of 2008. Now is the time to pressure your MPs and local representatives at every government level to ensure blank checks to a dying industry don't ultimately lead to the unparalleled devastation that unchecked climate change will bring. If one thing should be clear, we can't rely on politicians to act in the interest of our planet without shaming, pressuring, and holding them accountable for their empty rhetoric that endangers us all. Anyway, please like and subscribe, and I welcome respectful debate in the comments below.